Hello, and welcome to the Talking Research podcast. This is our second episode in the Women in Paramedicine series. I'm Laura Hirello. I'm a PhD candidate at Monash University and a member of the college's Research Advisory Committee. Just a heads up before we jump into our episode today, for our fourth episode for the series on women in paramedicine, we're actually going to have a panel discussion. And so we are looking to our listeners to send in some questions that they may have that they want to hear some insights on. So if you have any questions that you'd like to send in for our panel to discuss, please send an email to research.committee@paramedics.org. And I'm sure all that information will be in the notes beside this podcast. All right, so today I'm joined by Alisha McFarlane to discuss her paramedicine research. Alisha, thank you so much for being here. To start us off, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and your research journey?
Sure. Hi, Laura, and hi, everybody listening. Huge podcast fan, so this is a bit novel being on the other side of podcast land. My name's Alisha McFarlane. I'm a registered paramedic. I have been a paramedic now for 22 years. And so my background actually, from a paramedic perspective, is that I came in as a vocational paramedic. We didn't have, I think the degree was around when I started, but I think one university was running it and it just wasn't really a thing when I started. So I actually started down the vocational pathway and then did a top-up degree maybe 8 or 9 years in. And then went on to do lots of different roles inside. I worked for New South Wales Ambulance Service as a paramedic and worked in sort of project areas and clinical services, did a lot in the education space, and then went on and did intensive care paramedicine for a number of years, and then have strolled myself into the land of academia, which I started out doing casually, which is probably what a lot of us do in paramedicine. We dip our toe in, have this maybe interest in education, dip our toe in to see if it's something that we really want to jump into. And yeah, I think I've been full-time or certainly was full-time in that position for maybe the last 5 years or so. And then now obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, but I now work for the professional body, the college. What else is important in my background? I have a teaching background, so I'm a teacher by trade, which is probably worthwhile knowing. And yeah, that's probably enough about me at the minute. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but and in addition to all that, you're a PhD candidate in your
Well,
spare
that's probably
time on the
probably
side.
probably slightly significant given the podcast we're chatting about. Yes, also a PhD candidate with Monash University, and I'm looking essentially study in the space of gender studies. Particularly, my PhD is looking at gender equality in paramedicine, which this is a Women in Paramedicine series, and so there's a heavy focus on that. But importantly, gender equality is quite broad, right? So it's all things gender equality, but just given the nature of gender equality, there is a focus on women, yes.
And how far into the PhD program are you?
The land of PhD. I'm about 2 years in, so I've completed my confirmation of candidature, and I have there's a literature review that's completed, certainly only in draft form because those things are a bit of an evolution, aren't they? And I've just, after 9 months, gotten through my third layer of ethics for my project that I'm partnering with a beautiful jurisdictional ambulance service who's also invested in gender equality. So that's where I'm at the moment, as far as research is concerned. And for those, I suppose, who hear lots of, I guess, horror stories in relation to PhD, I hate it, or it's really hard. I've loved every minute of it. Not a minute have I hated. Yes, sometimes it's hard. Yes, sometimes it's challenging, but I genuinely love it. So
Yeah. I love that. And I think that all jobs are hard, right? Being a paramedic is hard, being a researcher is hard, just slightly different forms of hard. And sometimes that's made a little easier when you get to switch sort of between roles, which is sort of one of the beauties of being a paramedic and a researcher and
a few things. Yes, spice of life. It keeps things interesting. Absolutely.
And so for your actual research, I know you're talking about sort of gender equity and sort of gender studies in paramedicine, but you are seated in the paramedic department specifically. Do you know sort of the specifics of what you're going to be looking at in terms of your project specifically?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you talk about specifics because you certainly come into a PhD with an idea in mind, and I had come into a PhD from an honours program. So I completed honours, also working in the gender study space. So I looked at everyday sexism experiences of women in paramedicine. So it had this exposure to gender studies, sexism, sexual harassment, and that sort of space. And I think I thought I would continue down the same trajectory, which to some degree I have. But I think just as the process has gone along, the projects that are maybe involved in my PhD have changed along the way. So at the moment, I'm working on measuring gender equality, which is probably not necessarily where I thought I would start. So something that's pretty fascinating to me has always been the slow pace at which we implement, I suppose, clinical interventions in paramedicine. So we take a really long time to establish evidence and to go through pilot projects and to then, I guess, evaluate what that looks like, and then do we implement? So we go through all these steps. Yet when it comes to something like gender equality or an issue related to gender equality, we very quickly and reflexively try and implement something, and we don't know where we're starting from, and we don't really know where we finish. So how do you measure its effectiveness? And it sounds like a strange thing to try and measure, but for me, the idea is, well, how do you know if it's working? And this issue has existed since the beginning of time in regards to paramedicine, and there hasn't, despite what people may think, the change hasn't been that big. So obviously the things that we're doing, maybe they have some result, but maybe not what we were expecting. So my current project is around trying to develop a baseline for gender equality across a singular paramedic organisation that is hopefully representative of other paramedic organisations and employers. And then to say, well, here's a baseline, and then from there, looking at, well, if this is the baseline from a policy and document perspective, the gap is then, what does the implementation of that look like? And are they the same or different? I mean, we probably all have ideas about what that might look like. People listening will say, oh, I know what that will come out like. And I think something as a researcher that's really important is to always try and check yourself and say, well, I think I might know what it looks like, but let's see. Let's see what it actually says. So for me, the project at the moment is about measuring gender equality, and then it's about, from there, that will actually dictate a lot of the rest of my project, because there are 6 key quality indicators, and the idea of my project is then to pick the one of highest need, so the lowest performing indicator, and then build much of my PhD around that quality indicator. My goodness, that was a long response, but I hope that kind of gave you a
It's great. And I think you highlighted like a really important point, is that we demand evidence-based in our clinical protocols and our clinical actions. And yet somehow we lose that when we start to talk about more sort of organizational policies or how we're actually structuring ourselves as a profession, when actually evidence-based is just as important there and sort of just as legitimate and necessary to have if we want to see the profession grow.
And I think we hear this word evidence-based and evidence-informed all the time. Like, it is literally one of the biggest catchphrases we hear in paramedicine. But for some reason, we're reticent to apply it with the same rigor to non-clinical issues as we are to clinical. Or that's my perspective anyway. It may not be everyone's feelings, but that's how I feel. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think that that's sort of a traditionally entrenched idea in paramedicine that we really need to start moving away from, is that there are more types of research than we realize, and they're all legitimate in their own way, and they can all inform what we're doing, not just in the clinical space, but in all of the spaces.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I have a question that emerged from your description. Do you want to speak a little bit to the difference between gender equity versus gender equality? And I know that I'm delving into potentially very philosophical territory here, but I would love to, because I've heard you use them interchangeably, and I just wanted to know sort of if you have more to say about that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have probably seen the graphic as the difference between equity and equality. So I think what's really important is to acknowledge that what we know is all the intersectional factors that make a person, all the things, whether that's race or socioeconomic status or gender or all of those things actually make up where you start on a line. If you're running a race, I mean, we're not running races, but if we're going to use that analogy, we're running a race, the concept that everyone starts on the same line is just flawed. It's just not true. So we know if you are, and again, this is not meant to be offensive in any way, shape, or form, but we know if you are a white, middle-aged man, and not considering all those other things, it's really important. But if that is you, you start on a particular line. If you then become a woman, you start behind that line. If you then add race to that, you start further back, lower SES, education, we go further and further back. So your chance of getting to the finish line at the same time as the person at the start line is significantly different. And so it's about acknowledging those factors and trying to create an equitable environment in which to succeed. So equality is putting, if you've seen the picture of all the boxes and the fence, which some people have, the idea of equity is having different size boxes to give everybody the same view over the fence, right? The idea of equality is that you give the same size box to every person and expect the same outcome. So as someone who's 5'4", if you give me the same size box as someone who's 6'4", they are going to have a significantly different view to me. Is that the world's worst explanation? What I'm trying to do is give you lots of analogies that equality is giving everybody the same set of circumstances that you deem to be fair and saying we should then therefore achieve the same endpoint. Equity is applying different adjustments based on individual need to achieve the same endpoint.
I think that makes absolute sense to me and is such an important designation that I feel like often gets lost and like understandably gets lost, right? Like it's such a minute, if you're not in the research doing the work, then yeah, you maybe don't realize that there's a pretty big difference between these two concepts and a very big difference between solutions that enact these two concepts.
And I think importantly, sometimes the words can be used interchangeably because actually the point and the context of what you're saying doesn't actually matter. But there are points where the difference is important because people will often, and we can wander into the world of meritocracy, but people say, well, let's talk about merit and everybody is given the same standard, so why can't you get there? Well, because that's equality, not equity. So that's where it becomes important.
Yes, and I feel like the meritocracy is much more flawed than people give it credit for, in that, you know, you can see in the statistics, if you have a parent who has higher education, you're probably also going to have higher education, and just there are inherited things that we see as merit that maybe aren't actually as meritorious as we originally thought.
Absolutely. And look, I could talk about that all day because that's actually come up in my scoping review, my literature review, which I've just conveniently titled The Myth of Meritocracy, because we have this idea that we're naturally a trusting people, and we assume that merit processes are based on evidence. And the deeper you delve, the more you realize that quite often they're just based on historical practices that ultimately benefit the person that originally made up those practices. And I'm not suggesting that all those practices are gendered. I'm just saying whoever that person was replicated what their opinion, feelings, and biases were into the merit process.
Absolutely.
Tricky.
All right. So before we get too deep into the philosophy, maybe let's
No, sorry.
No, I mean, I'm here for it. I love it. Let's talk about word nuance all day, but I feel like that's so many researchers.
Yeah.
In terms of your research in a sort of more macro level, so far to date, what sort of resources, opportunities, and collaborations have really sort of been essential for your work and also just the path you've taken to get here?
Yeah, so I probably coming back to background, so I'm the first person in my family to study. I'm the first person to go to university, let alone undertake a PhD. So I don't have family support from someone's done it before. And I know that's a lot of paramedics. So a lot of paramedics are people that are first in family. We call them first in families, first in family to go to university, first in family to hold a professional job. So that actually puts us in a really interesting position in who we lean on and who our support networks are. So for me, I think around how I got here is probably, I mean, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? I think I was originally started down this path because I had personal experiences and I had lots of women in industry talking to me about their experiences, and I realized there were some thematic similarities. I thought, gee, this seems to be a really big problem. I'm also surrounded by some really amazing women in my life who are very articulate and strong, really thought-provoking women who would question what my thoughts were, what my political standpoints were, what, all that kind of stuff. So I think it comes from that place, really personal experience. And then the growth in research, the important points for me is that who I've surrounded myself with has changed over time. And that doesn't mean who I used to surround myself with is bad. I think your needs change is the point. So as your needs change as a researcher, so too does your support network. Importantly, I surrounded myself not just with paramedics, but surround myself with sociologists who have all this beautiful theoretical knowledge and often ask the question, but why? And annoyingly, like the 4-year-old in the back of the car that says, but why? They're a bit like that. Why do you think that? And why do you think that happened? And why is that so? So that's been really important to me. Also always including, given that a lot of this is about women's studies or gendered, always including lots of different perspectives. So perspectives of women, but perspectives of men, perspectives of people who identify as LGBTQI, because that's obviously a really significant intersectional factor, non-binary persons. So I think my support network, the important points for me is they change and they grow. They differ from time to time, and you just want to be mindful of your own echo chamber. So if you surround yourself by paramedics, you'll always hear a paramedic voice, which is important. But if we surround ourselves by ourselves all the time, then can start to sound the same a little bit. So yeah, that would be my piece of advice, and something that I've learned is make sure that you're getting perspectives from people who maybe work either in an industry or a discipline that is significantly different to your own.
And then I think that one of the challenges that paramedics face is the job is so unique that we tend to be quite insular as a group, because there are so few others who understand the experience of working as a paramedic and the shift work and the sort of what it does to your life, that we tend to stay quite contained when actually there's huge value in talking to other professions, talking to other areas of research, and they're all really interested in the paramedic experience, because often they don't know very much about it, but they do have interest there when they start to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's not to say that your paramedic mates and your colleagues don't have something to offer, because they do. They understand the shift work environment, the fatigue, maybe the challenges, the good stuff, the humor, all that stuff that is unique to our profession. That's why we love it so much. But equally, we can start to replicate each other's own opinions and equally our own biases. So I think as soon as you acknowledge that can happen, one of your jobs as a researcher is actually to work to overcome those things and make sure that your blind spot isn't spotted by someone else.
I agree. And I also think that it's been my experience, I don't know if you have this as well, but other professions, other areas of research love working with paramedics.
Yes.
Because
Yeah, they always find us really incredibly pragmatic, which I think, I don't know if that's your experience, but that the consistent thing I hear is you people, so they group us, which is pretty funny. You people are people of action. And I think that replicates our profession, right? Which is circumstances and the environment may not always be perfect, but we push on regardless, and we just adapt and overcome as we move. We don't sit stagnantly and think about it forever. We just kind of we think about it and plan a little, but when it doesn't go to plan, the great thing I think about paramedics is we're often able to take a big deep breath and still keep going and diverge a little bit anyway. And that applies to research. I think yeah, that's my experience anyway, is the pragmatism people are always admire in paramedics.
Yes. So just for a little additional context, so my PhD technically sits in the School of Psychology, so I'm often working with psychologists, and I get exactly the same feedback. They're like, you make things happen so quickly, and you're so good at pivoting because that's what I learned when I was a paramedic, is like,
It's your
if something
job,
needs
right?
to be done, then I have to do it. And if situation changes, then I have to adapt, and we just got to keep moving forward.
Let's not sit here and yap about it. Let's just move on. No one's got time in their day for that. We're not, paramedics by nature are not stagnant beings, right? Where we move around all the time. That's why we were drawn to a job that perhaps isn't behind a desk and doesn't go to the same place of work every day. We're creatures that like a dynamic environment and so replicate research the same way.
Absolutely. So in your research so far, are there any sort of really unexpected findings or like things that have emerged really early on in the process that you maybe weren't expecting, or sort of challenges that you hadn't originally been anticipating?
Um, I mean, we could talk about ethics till the cows come home, really, couldn't we? Everyone warns you. And you think, oh, how hard could it be? Now, I don't think ethics is hard. I think it's time consuming. I think it's a process. I think it tests your mental will. So I think I don't think it's that I wasn't expecting it. I think it tested and challenged me more than I was expecting. The finite detail, the multiple layers. So for context, the project that I'm currently in, had to go through 3 layers of ethics for one project. And my project is also needed approval through a health service, a health system. And that we have to remember that there's a level of, we're all publicly funded, everyone's publicly funded in the health system, mostly. And therefore there's a level of there's a certain level of risk aversion that's associated with that. And then publicly, what might that look like? If we get our funding publicly, how do we look to the public? So there's a level, there's all these additional steps. They're not bad steps. They're just additional steps that you don't know exist until you're really swimming in it. So for me, ethics is probably the unplanned thing. And for me, some of the findings have been interesting. Something that I found in my literature, for example, was we knew that the media had a lot of power. I mean, here we are talking on a podcast. So we know that media is a powerful medium. But what I hadn't considered wasn't just the way that we communicate internally. So if we work for a particular organization and their media unit tells us things about ourselves as paramedics, then that's one form of communication. But what I found fascinating was the impact that the external communication then has on our internal culture. It made complete sense once I started to roll it around, which is if we reflect societal norms and expectations, and then we, I guess, reflect that back out to the community, and then we recruit from that community to our profession, then is it no wonder that we have this like cyclical process of cultural norms and expectations inside our own profession? And that probably sounds a bit waffly. I don't mean for it to be, but what I mean to say is that whatever we put out as a profession, we bring it straight back in. So if we want to portray paramedics as people that swing out of helicopters, and that's the primary form of patient care and response, then that is what we recruit. They are the people that we recruit that come in with expectations. And then equally, if we want to put out into the world that, you know, most of our paramedics are women and they come in and do a lot of patient transfer or primary care type jobs, then that is the type of people we will then recruit in. So those things can live alongside each other. What I'm trying to do is just say that it was unexpected, which was the question. What didn't you expect? I didn't expect the power of external influence to have the same level of power on internal cultural influence.
So true. Yeah, I had never really thought about it, but like as you're talking about it, the thing that comes to mind is the interactions that you have in the grocery store when you're in uniform.
Yeah.
Like how the public interacts with you, that always depends on like what's going on in the media. Is there a highlight on paramedics at the time? Is there scandal? Is there whatever? Directly impacts sort of how the public talks to you at the grocery store when you're in uniform and you're just trying to get some snacks, and you take that with you onto your next call, into your next job.
Right. Yeah, that public perception is really fascinating to me, and I think we've got this, we probably won't talk about it in great depth today, but we do have this cultural challenge currently going on inside of a profession. It's long standing and it continues. And so if we don't, I guess the question is, if that's a really big driver of our internal culture, then we need to look at, well, what is it that we're communicating to the public about our own profession? Are we accurately representing who we are? Are we using the right language, the right imagery? What is it that we're doing that is replicating the things that we want, but equally the things that maybe we want to change?
And there's that whole piece around what is the job we're selling students on versus what is the job we're actually doing, and what does that do to paramedic identity and student identity as they become paramedics. That sort of maybe this vision of swinging out of helicopters isn't actually their daily life. And how do they cope with that?
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. And so how do you feel like your research impacts working paramedics today? What would you say is the impact there?
Yeah, look, I don't know yet. I think it's a really great question. Every researcher starts out because I guess you start down a road because you want it to be impactful. No one's doing research for the sake of doing research, or if they are, I mean, I don't know any paramedics that would do that. I think everybody's doing research because they hope it has this translational effect, that you see a positive change or shift or practice change, whatever it is. So I hope that it's impactful. I think what I have seen, and I'm only talking from my perspective, is that from a gender studies perspective, is that people just knowing that someone or a group of people are interested and are researching and are trying to make changes is impactful. People wanting to do something about it is impactful, because there's a lot of evidence around, not just in our own profession, but in cognate professions, around people feeling invisible and unheard or silenced, use whatever word you like. So the fact that they can see, hear, read about research that's going on in that space, I think that feels impactful. I've also seen researchers of different genders and different backgrounds after I've started also researching in that space, and that feels really good, that people know it's okay to research gender studies, whatever the particular interest might be. I think that feels really good and impactful. And I'm watching more women. We are talking about women in paramedicine, so I'm watching more women engage in research, and I don't think that's something we thought we could necessarily do. I'm not suggesting that men always think they can do it either, but I'm just suggesting that historically there have been less women engaged in that space, and it's nice to see women paramedics, regardless of what they're researching, just getting into research. It's cool, super cool.
I forget who it was who said this, but I remember somebody saying that all paramedics get into research because something bothers them.
Something bothers them. Yeah, I have that conversation all the time. I often stand in front of groups of people. They're often young people, new grads, or people early in their profession, and say to them, you don't think you like research, because when I was 21 or 22 early, it's not my jam. I studied PE teaching. Now that's not a slant at PE teachers, because I still love sport. But my point being is the idea of a PE teacher or even a paramedic being a primary researcher, I'm not sure that's why you enter the profession to start with. And so I often stand in front of them and say, something will bother you. It'll be something. It'll be because you can't give a particular drug to a patient. It'll be because you work rurally or regionally, and that person that you care about doesn't have the same access to healthcare. It'll be because you're doing on-call at night and you are really tired, and then you get tasked with a job that's hundreds of kilometres away. So something will bother you. And for me, it was the frequency with which women were having negative experiences or barriers to career progression inside their own profession. I was like, this is happening. And it bothered me enough to actually, I guess, be more curious than I was before.
Yeah, it bothers you into action when you just can't put it down anymore.
Yeah, that's right. When it bothers you, not just when you're at work, but outside of work. For me, that was a point of action. And watching other people perhaps feel disempowered or not knowing where to start. And not that I knew where to start, but I thought I have enough connections now with my background into education and research that maybe I could make a start.
And so it's a fantastic segue into whether or not you have any advice for researchers or paramedics who are interested in getting more involved in research.
Oh yeah, that. Just start. Like, isn't that a great? Well, just do it. How hard could it be? It's actually not that hard. Research is not hard. It's just grit. It's just willpower and grit. And I genuinely mean it. It's not just for the podcast. I've loved every minute of it. I've learned something. I had a meeting this morning with some researchers, and I don't know. It's just, I really loved it. I love sitting down and learning something and hearing about other people's experiences or a different way to do things. Hacks. What's the hack to do that? What's a quick way? But my advice is it's kind of like lots of things in life. There's never a perfect time to start. You just have to start. So you just find one person that you know has an in. And the in might be the subject matter, it might be research, it might be education, it might be a lot of things. And that person is probably outside of your circle, and that person is probably outside of your employment. Because we so often, as paramedics, go inside our organisations, and that's not a bad thing. But what I've learned in research is that often the key to whatever I'm trying to achieve sits outside of my normal organisation or my normal network. And so having those conversations is they're not even brave, they're courageous conversations, right? They're conversations with someone that you don't know about a topic that you care about. So that's my advice. Just start. How hard could it be, Laura?
There's a researcher in my department, and they have a post-it on their computer, and it says "No grit, no pearl."
Ooh, I like
Right?
it. No
Yeah,
grit, no pearl. That's
no
really,
grit, no
it's
pearl.
so true. And women in paramedicine, and I know we're here to talk to everybody, but this is about women, right? And women have grit. You've already got grit. You're already working in an industry that requires grit. So you have that in spades. That's my advice. You've already got it. All you've got to do is apply it to a different area about something that you're passionate. My other piece of advice, because why not throw two in there, is don't let anyone talk you into a research subject that you don't have passion for. So lots of people say, oh, just start out, we'll give you this and you just do this. You'll never finish it. You'll barely start it. So my advice is you go with the idea and then let people help you work it out. Don't take on someone else's idea unless it's something that they say it and you immediately feel fire and passion for it. It's kind of like a pair of pants in a store. You know, when you put on a pair of pants or a dress or whatever you're putting on, and if it's amazing, you just know it's amazing straight away. Whereas if it's okay and you still take it home, you never wear it. It's never as good as it was in the store, so you're never going to put it on. And a research topic's a bit like that. If you don't feel it from the get-go, you're not suddenly going to feel it in 6 months. So put on or wait for the quality pair of pants and let them be your pants, not someone else's.
No, I was talking to one of my honor students not that long ago, and they had two sort of slightly different projects, and they were like, which one should I do? And I was like, do the one that you can think about for a year. Like, what are you willing to talk about and
What do you
interact
love?
with and do
Yeah.
for a full year? Like, that's what you should be doing.
Yeah, totally. And for me, I think coming from a single parent background and watching my mum work really, really hard, I've always had this really strong sense of social justice. So it's not a paramedic thing for me. It's part of my values system, as it is for a lot of paramedics, to be honest. We're very, very driven by social justice and principles of equality because that's why we've entered healthcare. So those principles to me have now just been applied to my research in a different space. And if you've got those principles, whatever they are, sitting inside you, you just apply them in different ways. Yeah.
So How do you see your work and this research area evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? I feel like that's such a good question for you because there's so much happening.
Yeah, there is a lot happening. How does it evolve? I think, I mean, step one, finish PhD for me. That would be nice, wouldn't it? I would love it just to be, when I say finish, it's not that I want to get to the end. I just want to know that I can do it. So for me, from a personal perspective, how it evolves for me is working through each project and finishing. But how does it evolve? I think, yeah, it's a really good question. I think I've learned to be really open to different projects. Like I said, each project I'm doing inside my PhD is fed from the previous one. So you're asked to make a plan, and I pretty quickly learned that that plan all sort of goes to high heavens pretty quickly. And you got to get comfortable with that, with the fact that there's a plan and that plan is never the same every 6 months. It always looks different. So I think from a researching evolution, I am now comfortable with the plan being not to plan too much. And that's okay. I feel really good about that. How does this space evolve? I think it becomes just part of the general conversation instead of this. What I don't like when we talk about women in paramedicine or issues related to gender equality is they become a little bit tick boxy. I hate that. I don't want it to be a tick boxing exercise for me or anyone else in that space. I don't want it to be a 3-month education program that's rolled out to everybody. They tick a box and we move on. It doesn't look like that. I think what I would like to see us do is accept that we have some issues, as every industry does, and treat it like any other issue, give it the time and the rigor and the effort that it deserves. We don't just group together a group of random people and say, hey, what do you think works? Implement that and tick a box. So for me, it's about us valuing research that's of a clinical and non-clinical nature. That's really meaningful to me. I would love to see rates of workplace sexual harassment decline. I would love to see us stop using the phrase gender equality and gender parity interchangeably. Drives me absolutely nuts. Anyone who speaks to me already knows that. But having the same amount of men and women or same amount of people on the ground is the bare minimum. Say it again, everyone. Your population representative inside your own profession as to what it is out in society, that's just how it should be. That's not an achievement. That's just like butter. So for me, I want us to stop reporting on gender parity because that's just what it should be. And then I'd love us, I suppose the other evolution for me is watching all processes related to merit questioned. And by that, I just mean, is that criteria evidence-based? Does it currently reflect what we need? When's the last time we looked at that? And should we look at that again? So I'm not suggesting all processes are flawed. I'm just suggesting that we should review them, ask where they came from and ask where the evidence comes from. So that's evolution for me, is that we apply principles from clinical to non-clinical. We value men, women, non-binary people equally and not just on a piece of paper, but in actual reality. And we start to say, well, if there's 50% of men and 50% of women, and obviously non-binary people are grouped into that pool of people as well, if those people exist, then why is there gender disparity in certain places? What is creating that disparity when, from what we can see, women and men actually want to achieve the same things? So that's it for me. I just want to see the landscape shift a little bit.
I always think about the goal of like getting to the point, getting to the day when, yes, we'll still have research on women in paramedicine and sort of gender issues in paramedicine, but it will also be embedded into all projects because it will just be part of our language and part of the expectation, right?
Yeah.
That this is what you need to have to do these things, to do this research.
And I feel that way about all intersectional factors. I feel that way about gender. I feel that way about race and about sexual preference. It needs to stop being this add-on, this tack on to research. It's just part of a considered factor to any process that we acknowledge creates both advantage and privilege and challenge depending on who it's applied to. And once we accept that, because the evidence is there, once we accept that, then we just build it into normal practice. And that's a good day, right? That's a good day in the office.
Exactly. That's all we need to do. That's just where
Sounds
we need
easy. It's totally easy. It's totally
easy
fine.
peasy. Excellent. And so is there anything that I've missed or anything about your work that you feel is really important that you didn't get a chance to talk about or you want to sort of share with the audience or include as a take home?
Look, probably not. I think the most important thing about research is you think researchers are, well, I used to think researchers are a particular subset of people. Like these people that sit over here, and not that they're fancy, but they're people who just research and they're not interested in anything else. And again, I come from a single parent background, working class, lower working class kind of family, very modest upbringing. I don't have anything fancy in my background. So I think research is a bit of an enigma for a lot of people because I think you have to have a set of skills to even consider it. And it's just not true. I don't think you come in with any skills necessarily. You can come in with a blank slate and you just need to come in and have an idea. So that's what I would go with. And then just be super adaptable and flexible. We talked about that. But for me, it's more about personality, really, than it is about what other things you bring. Because we can teach, it's kind of like paramedics, right? You can teach skills. We can teach skills to any parent. You can learn the most complex skill, but actually the thing that separates really amazing clinicians from people who are kind of just sitting on standard are the decision makers, the critical thinkers, and the application of those skills. And research is the same.
Yeah, it's a lot of the same skills that paramedics already have. It's investigation, it's assessment, and then it's doing something about it. It's action.
And we are people of action, Laura. So to anyone who's sitting out there that is, considered it or doesn't know where to start, hopefully the college is a place for that, or you are, or myself, or someone connected to your circle just has a little in. It's all you need is just someone that can connect you with the right person. And we've all probably got them, even if we don't know about them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So if anybody has any questions for Alisha or any of our guests in this series, or anything that you wanted to send in so that we can ask our panel about it in our last episode, please reach out to us at research.committee@paramedics.org, because we have one more sort of regular episode in our Women in Paramedicine series. And then again, we'll be wrapping up with that panel discussion. So stay tuned to hear what comes next.